The keys landed on the kitchen counter with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Her mother's voice came from the doorway, low and sharp. "You need to be there, Angela. If you don't show up, people will talk." Angela stood at her window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline, her hands completely still at her sides. "It's my house, Mom." Silence. Then, softer, more dangerous. "It was never officially yours, sweetheart. You never signed anything." Angela turned. Her mother was already looking away. And that was the moment. Not the divorce. Not the stolen design. Not the years of giving and giving until there was almost nothing left. That single sentence. "It was never officially yours." She walked out of her apartment without a coat. Down the stairs. Into the January street. She stepped off the curb. A horn blared. Headlights flooded her vision. Tires screamed on wet asphalt. And then, a hand. One hand. Grabbing her arm and pulling her back so hard she spun into a chest like a wall, and the car shot past in a blur of wind and noise. She looked up. Dark coat. Sharp jaw. Eyes that didn't blink. A stranger. He looked down at her like he had been waiting for this exact moment. Like pulling her back was the easiest thing he had ever done. "Careful," he said quietly. "You're not finished yet. Before I tell you what happened next, I need a second. Because this story is for every woman who has ever built something beautiful and watched someone else move into it. Every woman who was told she was the strong one so many times she started believing she didn't need anything. If that's you, if you have ever been the foundation everyone else stood on while you stood on nothing, this story is going to hit differently. Like this video right now. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because the comments on stories like this one remind me why I keep telling them. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's been overlooked, replaced, or quietly erased by the people who were supposed to love her most, share this before you keep watching. Because what happens between Angela and the man who pulled her out of the street that night is not what you think. He is not a good man. The whole city knows his name and none of them say it lightly. But he saw her on a sidewalk in January, cold coffee in her hand, watching her dream get handed to her sister, and he made a decision that was going to change everything. Let's go back to where it really started. She stood on the sidewalk in the January cold, watching the moving truck back into the driveway of the house she had spent 3 years designing in her head. The navy blue shutters. The white porch with the hanging fern hooks. The bay window in the kitchen where she had always imagined drinking coffee in the morning while the rest of New York woke up slowly around her. Every detail was exactly right. Every detail was exactly hers. And none of it belonged to her anymore. Angela Reyes stood there in a gray wool coat with a broken zipper she hadn't fixed yet, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, and she did not cry. She had already decided she wasn't going to cry. Not today. Not in front of the neighbors. Not in front of her mother, who was standing at the end of the driveway dabbing her eyes and saying things like, "Sienna worked so hard for this," and "Isn't it beautiful," in the same breath, like beauty and fairness were the same thing. They were not the same thing. But no one in Angela's family had ever seemed to notice the difference. The house at 14, Callaway Lane in Connecticut had not been Sienna's idea. It had been Angela's. 3 years ago, Angela had found the listing on a Thursday night after a 12-hour shift at the architectural firm where she worked as a senior designer. She had saved the address in her phone under a folder she called Someday. She had driven past it 4 times. She had sketched the interior renovations in a notebook she kept in her nightstand drawer. She had calculated the mortgage, mapped out the down payment timeline, and told exactly one person about it. Sienna. Her younger sister. The one currently directing 2 men in matching gray uniforms on how to carry her velvet sectional through the front door without scratching the paint. That was only the beginning. Here is what you need to know about Angela Reyes. She was 31 years old, a lead designer at Harmon & Blake Architecture in Manhattan, the kind of woman who could walk into a gutted building and immediately see what it wanted to become. She had a gift for spaces, for understanding what a room was trying to say beneath the drywall and the bad lighting. She had spent her entire career making beautiful things for other people. She had spent her entire personal life doing the same thing. She was the sister who helped with homework, who lent money without tracking it, who showed up to every recital and every crisis with the same steady presence, the same calm hands. She was the strong one. She was the dependable one. She was the one who quietly built the foundation everyone else stood on without once asking for credit. And Sienna was the one who smiled and took the applause. 27 years old, Sienna Reyes had never held a job for longer than 18 months. She drifted through careers the way some people drift through cities, with enthusiasm at the start and a clean exit strategy at the end. Event planning. Social media consulting. A candle business that lasted 4 months. But Sienna had one talent that eclipsed all of it. She knew how to make men feel like they had discovered something rare. And 6 months ago, she had deployed that talent on Daniel Marsh, a venture capital associate with family money and a desire to seem cultured, and within 3 weeks, he had offered to buy her a home. She had chosen 14, Callaway Lane. Because Angela had described it to her. In detail. On a Tuesday evening over dinner at their mother's house in Brooklyn. Angela's hand tightened around the cold coffee cup. She exhaled. Then she turned and started walking back toward her car. She was not going to make a scene. She was not going to say the thing burning at the back of her throat. She was going to get in her car, drive back to her apartment in Manhattan, and figure out how to grieve a future quietly, the way she had been trained to grieve everything. But as she reached her car, a black vehicle she had not noticed before was parked directly behind her. Long, expensive, the kind of car that didn't belong on this street. And leaning against it, arms folded, watching her with the kind of focus that did not look casual, was the same man from the street. The one who had pulled her back from the headlights. Dark coat. Sharp jaw. Eyes that didn't blink. He wasn't looking at the house. He was looking at her. And the expression on his face was not curiosity. It was recognition. Like he had already decided something. Like he had decided it before she even knew he existed. And she had absolutely no idea yet how long he had been watching. She had seen that look before. Not from a man like this. Never from a man like this. But she recognized it the way you recognize a sound you haven't heard in years. Something old and certain underneath all the noise. Angela stopped walking. Her keys were in her hand. Her instinct said get in the car. Something else, something quieter and more dangerous, said wait. The man did not move. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal overcoat that looked like it had been made specifically for his body. Late 30s, olive complexion, dark hair cut clean. No jewelry she could see, but the absence of it felt intentional, the way everything about him felt intentional. Like nothing he did was accidental. Ms. Reyes, he said. His voice was low. Unhurried. Like he had all the time in the world and had already decided how this conversation ended. Angela's spine straightened. I'm sorry, who are you? He reached into his coat and produced a card. He held it out, not aggressively, just simply, the way someone offers a fact. She didn't take it immediately. She looked at his face first. That was a mistake. Or maybe it wasn't. His name was Caruso. Just Caruso, the card said. Below it, a Manhattan address in the financial district and a single phone number. No title. No company name. Just the name, like that was enough. And looking at him, Angela had the unsettling feeling that it was. How do you know my name? She asked. I know a great deal about you, he said. Not as a threat. As a statement. That should concern me. Probably, he agreed. He tilted his head slightly. You designed the Whitmore Gallery renovation last year. She blinked. The Whitmore Gallery was her proudest project. A crumbling 1920s building in Connecticut that she had transformed into one of the most talked about cultural spaces on the East Coast. It had taken 14 months, 3 contractors, and more sleepless nights than she could count. I did, she said carefully. I commissioned it, Caruso said. Angela stared at him. You're the anonymous donor. I prefer private investor, he said, and the corner of his mouth moved just slightly. Not quite a smile. Something more restrained. The building needed someone who could see what it was supposed to be. You were the only architect who understood that. Angela felt something shift in her chest. The Whitmore Commission had come through a third party, a legal firm representing an undisclosed client. She had spent 14 months pouring herself into that project, never knowing who had trusted her with it. He had chosen her, and she hadn't even known his name. But that wasn't why she felt off balance. She felt off balance because of the way he was looking at her. Not at her work. Not at the house behind her. At her. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Because I was having you watched." Drop a comment right now if you've ever had someone see your value before you saw it yourself. Because that's exactly what was happening here, and Angela had no idea yet how deep it went. He said it without apology, without performance. Just the truth, plain and direct. "That's not an acceptable answer," Angela said. "I know," Caruso said. "But it's the honest one." He glanced briefly over her shoulder toward the house, where the sound of Sienna's laughter floated out through the open front door. Something passed across his face. Not judgment. Something colder. Recognition of its own kind. "That house was yours," he said. It wasn't a question. Angela's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter now." "It matters," Caruso said simply. "Everything that belongs to you matters." The words landed somewhere they shouldn't have. Angela was 31 years old and nobody, not a single person in her life, had ever said that to her. Everything that belongs to you matters. She looked down at the business card in her hand. Then she looked back up at him. "What do you want?" she asked. Caruso held her gaze. His eyes were dark, unhurried, certain. "I want to offer you a commission," he said. "I have a building in Manhattan. A full renovation. I want your vision, no interference, complete creative authority." He paused. "And I want you to have dinner with me afterward." Angela blinked. "That's a strange package." "I'm a straightforward man," he said. "I don't waste time." He nodded once, gently, like a period at the end of a sentence. "Think about it." Then he opened the car door, got in, and drove away. Angela stood on the sidewalk in the January cold, holding a business card, her broken zipper letting the wind in, and felt the strangest sensation spreading through her chest. Not fear. Not even confusion. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. Behind her, Sienna's voice rang out across the lawn. "Angela, come see the kitchen." Angela did not turn around. She looked at the card one more time. Then she put it in her pocket and got in her car. She had a decision to make. And for the first time in a very long time, it was entirely hers. She called the number on a Wednesday. She had waited 4 days because she refused to be the woman who called immediately. She sat in her car outside her Manhattan apartment building on a cold gray morning, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, and told herself she was calling about the commission. Just the commission. Nothing else. He picked up on the first ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," Caruso said. No hello. No pretense. Like he had been sitting somewhere quiet, waiting for exactly this. "You said you have a building," Angela said. "I do. Send me the address. I'll come see it this week." There was a pause. Not an uncertain one. A deliberate one. "Saturday morning," he said. "I'll meet you there." "You don't need to meet me there. I can assess a property alone." "I know you can," Caruso said. "I want to be there anyway." Angela opened her mouth to argue. Then she remembered the way he had said everything that belongs to you matters on a Connecticut sidewalk like it was the most obvious thing in the world, and she closed it again. "Saturday," she said. 10 o'clock. "I'll bring coffee," he said. And he hung up. Here is what you need to understand about Angela's life before Caruso. She had been engaged once. His name was Philip, and he was a real estate attorney who had proposed on a rooftop in Brooklyn on a night that should have been perfect, and in many ways was, except for the part where he had been sleeping with his paralegal for 8 months. Angela had found out the way you find out these things. Accidentally. A phone left unlocked on the kitchen counter. A thread that went back further than she had the stomach to read. She had ended it quietly. Packed his things while he was at work. Left the ring on the kitchen table with no note, because everything that needed to be said had already been said by the messages on his phone. Sienna had been sympathetic for 3 days. Then she had started dating Philip 6 weeks later. She had told their mother it wasn't serious. Their mother had said Angela needed to be more forgiving. Angela had stopped going to Sunday dinners after that. She had buried herself in work. The Whitmore Gallery. A hotel renovation in Massachusetts. A private residence commission in Washington. She had made herself indispensable to her clients and invisible to everyone else. And she had been fine. She had been completely, absolutely fine. She repeated this to herself on Saturday morning as she drove to the address Caruso had sent. It was a building in Lower Manhattan. 6 stories, early 20th century, brick facade, arched windows that had been covered with boards sometime in the last decade. It looked abandoned from the outside. It looked extraordinary. Angela stood on the sidewalk staring up at it and felt the familiar pull, the specific hunger she got when she saw a space with potential that was being wasted. "You feel it already," Caruso said from behind her. She turned. He was standing 10 feet away holding 2 coffees, watching her face with the same unhurried attention he had given her in Connecticut. He was dressed simply. Dark jeans, a black coat, no tie. He looked less like a business meeting and more like a man who had decided to be exactly himself and stopped apologizing for it. "What was it before?" she asked, accepting the coffee. "A ballroom," he said. "Built in 1924. Private events, jazz bands, the kind of nights that don't happen anymore." He handed her the coffee and looked up at the building. "I want it to be something again. I want people to walk in and feel like they're inside something that remembers it was once beautiful." Angela looked at him sideways. "That's a very specific brief." "You're a very specific architect," he said. They went inside. The interior was raw and gutted and magnificent, high ceilings with original plasterwork still visible beneath years of grime, iron columns running the length of the main floor, a mezzanine level that wrapped the entire perimeter and looked out over a space that could hold 500 people easily. Angela walked slowly, touching walls, tilting her head, listening to the building the way she always did, trying to hear what it needed. Caruso walked beside her, quietly, not filling the silence with unnecessary words. She noticed that most people filled silence because they were uncomfortable in it. He was not uncomfortable. He seemed to find her process interesting. "Ask me what you're thinking," Angela said. He glanced at her. "How long before you knew what it needed?" She stopped. She considered lying and said the truth instead. 40 seconds after I walked through the door." He looked at the ceiling. His jaw moved slightly. Satisfaction, she thought. Like he had been right about something and was choosing not to say so. "Tell me," he said. Angela looked around the room, and for 20 minutes she talked. She talked about the original plasterwork and how to restore it. About lighting that felt like 1924 but functioned like now. About the mezzanine and how to make it intimate instead of just elevated. She talked about the ballroom's bones and what they were asking for. Caruso listened. He did not interrupt once. He did not check his phone. He stood in the middle of a gutted Manhattan ballroom at 10 in the morning and gave her his complete, total, undivided attention. When she finished, he said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "You're the only person I've ever met who talks about a building the way I think about people." Angela felt that sentence in a place she wasn't expecting. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Most people see what's broken," Caruso said. "You see what it was trying to be." He looked at her directly. "That's rare." The room was very quiet. January light came through the arched windows in long pale strips. Angela realized she was standing closer to him than she had intended. She took one step back, not quickly, just carefully. "I'll take the commission," she said. Caruso nodded. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "And dinner?" he asked. Angela looked at the ceiling one more time. Then she looked at him. "One dinner," she said. "After I submit the first design proposal." He almost smiled. "Fair enough," he said. But when she turned to leave, she heard him say quietly, almost to himself, "She has no idea yet." Angela stopped. "What did you say?" "I said the light is better in the afternoon," Caruso said smoothly. Angela looked at him for a long second. Then she walked out. Her heart was doing something she hadn't told it to do. That was a problem. But it was a problem she would deal with later. She found out who he was on a Tuesday. She had been 3 weeks into the ballroom commission, deep in material sourcing and structural assessments, when her colleague James dropped a newspaper on her desk and said, "Isn't this your new client?" Angela looked down. The headline read, "Caruso Crime Empire Under Federal Watch, Manhattan's Most Powerful Underground Figure Refuses Comment." There was a photograph. It was him. Same jaw. Same dark coat. Same eyes that didn't blink. Angela sat very still for a moment. Then she picked up the newspaper and read every word. Caruso. First name never published. Age 39. Born in New York to a family with organized crime roots going back 2 generations. Never charged. Never convicted. Described in federal documents as the most disciplined criminal mind operating on the East Coast. Real estate holdings, private equity, and at least 4 businesses used as financial infrastructure for operations the article declined to specify. She set the paper down. Picked up her phone. Put it back down. Stood up. Sat down again. James said, "Do you want to talk about it?" "No," Angela said. She took the newspaper home. She spread it on her kitchen table in her Manhattan apartment, made herself a cup of tea, and sat down with it the way she sat down with a difficult building, slowly, without flinching, trying to hear what it was actually saying beneath the surface. He had told her he wasn't a good man. He hadn't used those exact words, but he had stood in a ballroom and said most people see what's broken, and she had understood it wasn't just about the building. He had been telling her something about himself. She had heard it and chosen to keep moving forward. That told her something about herself she wasn't entirely comfortable with. But here is the thing about Angela Reyes that very few people understood. She was not naive. She was not a woman who confused intensity for safety. She had been careful her entire life, careful with her feelings, careful with her trust, careful to the point where she had nearly starved herself of the one thing she actually needed, which was to be seen. And Caruso saw her. That was the dangerous part. Not his world. Not the newspaper headline. But the specific, quiet, devastating way he looked at her like she was the answer to a question he had been carrying for a very long time. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Caruso. Of course. She answered. "You've seen it," he said. "No hello." He always seemed to know. "The newspaper," she said. "Yes." A pause. "And?" Angela looked out her window at the Manhattan skyline. The city looked the way it always did, indifferent and magnificent. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Because I wanted you to work with me before you decided what I was," Caruso said. His voice was even, measured, but underneath it she heard something careful. Like he was carrying the answer and waiting to see what she did with it. "That wasn't your choice to make," Angela said. "No," he agreed immediately. "It wasn't. I'm sorry." She had not expected that. Philip had never apologized for anything. Her mother turned apologies into negotiations. Sienna performed them like theater. But Caruso said "I'm sorry" the way he said everything else, like he meant it completely and expected nothing in return for meaning it. "I'm not ending the commission," Angela said. Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, "Why not?" "Because the building deserves to be finished," she said. "And because you told me the truth even when you didn't have to." She heard him exhale slowly. "There is something else you should know," he said. Angela closed her eyes briefly. "Tell me." "The reason I came to Connecticut that day, it wasn't only about the commission." The skyline outside her window blurred slightly. "Then why?" Caruso was quiet for a moment. In the silence, Angela heard the city, the heat clicking in her radiator, her own heartbeat, which had become inconveniently loud. "I had been following your work for 2 years," he said. "Not your professional work. You. The way you showed up for people. The way you built things for everyone else and asked for nothing. The way you watched your whole life get handed to someone who didn't earn it and still stood on that sidewalk without falling apart." He paused. "I came because I needed to know if you were real." Angela's throat tightened. "And," she whispered. "You're more real than anyone I've ever met," Caruso said simply. The radiator clicked. The city hummed. Angela stood in her kitchen holding the phone with both hands without realizing it. "One dinner," she said finally. "When I finish the first proposal. I'll be there," he said. And the way he said it, like it was already done, like he had already decided, made her feel something she had spent 3 years refusing to feel. Safe. Not because he was safe. He wasn't. She had just read the newspaper. But safe in the specific way that comes from being chosen by someone who looked at all of you, not just the parts you polished and presented, and decided you were worth the risk. That feeling was more dangerous than anything the newspaper had printed. And she was going to feel it anyway. The first design proposal took 4 weeks. Angela worked on it the way she worked on everything that mattered, obsessively, quietly, with total commitment. She rebuilt the ballroom on paper before she rebuilt it in reality. Restored plasterwork sourced from a craftsman in Massachusetts who specialized in early 20th century preservation. Lighting that moved between warm amber and soft white depending on the time of night. The mezzanine redesigned with curved iron railings that matched the original columns. A bar along the east wall made from reclaimed wood pulled from a demolished building in Brooklyn, history folded into history. She presented it to Caruso on a Thursday afternoon in a conference room in the financial district. He sat across from her, sleeves rolled to the elbows, reading her proposal with the same complete attention he gave everything. He turned each page slowly. She sat across from him in silence. She had learned by now that he didn't need to be entertained while he thought. When he finished, he set the proposal down and looked at her. "This is exactly what I saw when I first walked in," he said. "And more." "That's the goal," Angela said. "How long?" he asked. 14 months if the structural work cooperates. 16 if it doesn't. He nodded once. "Start immediately. Full budget approval. No limits." Then he looked at her with that particular steadiness she had come to recognize. "And you owe me a dinner." Angela had not forgotten. She had thought about it more than she would admit. "Tonight is too soon," she said. "Saturday," he said. "I know a place in Connecticut." Angela almost laughed. Connecticut. The state where she had watched her sister move into her house. He had chosen it deliberately, she could tell by the almost imperceptible shift in his expression. Like he was watching to see if she understood. She understood. He wanted to give her a different memory of the place where something had been taken from her. She picked up her copy of the proposal and slid it into her bag. "Saturday," she said. "But I drive myself." He nodded. "Of course." Saturday came with clean cold air and a pale winter sun that had given up trying to be warm but was still showing up anyway. Angela wore a dark burgundy dress she had bought 3 years ago and never had occasion to wear. She drove to Connecticut with the windows cracked, a playlist she had made and changed 4 times, and a feeling in her chest she refused to name yet. The restaurant was small. Candlelit, warm, the kind of place with heavy curtains and tables far apart. Caruso was already seated when she arrived. He stood when she walked in. Not performatively. Instinctively. Like it was simply what you did when someone worth standing for entered the room. She sat across from him. They ordered. And then, for the first time since she had met him, they talked like two people with no agenda. He told her about growing up in New York, in a neighborhood in Brooklyn where power was the only currency that kept you whole, and he had learned very early that the world divided people into those who took and those who were taken from. He had decided at 14 that he would be neither. Angela told him about her first year at architecture school in California, when she had been the only woman in her advanced theory seminar and her professor had told her she designed beautifully but perhaps too emotionally. She had gone home and cried and then come back the next week and designed the best thing in the class. Caruso smiled at that. A full smile this time, not the restrained corner of the mouth thing she had seen before. It transformed his face. Made him look like someone who had once known how to be young. "You never stopped," he said. "Designing emotionally. It's the only way to make something that lasts," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "I think that's true about more than buildings," he said. The candle between them flickered. Outside, the Connecticut winter pressed against the glass. But inside the restaurant it was warm, amber-lit. And still, and Angela felt the walls she had spent 3 years carefully constructing begin to develop cracks she had not authorized. She thought about the newspaper. She thought about what it meant to choose a man the world called dangerous. She thought about Philip, who had been safe on paper and disastrous in practice. She thought about her sister in the house with the navy shutters, living a life built on borrowed foundations. And then she stopped thinking. She looked at Caruso across the candlelight, this man who had seen her work before he ever met her, who had stood on a sidewalk and told her she mattered, who had been honest about his world even when honesty cost him something. "I need to ask you something," she said. He put down his glass. "Anything," he said, and he meant it. "The danger," she said. "The world you're in. Is it something you're trying to leave, or something you've accepted?" Caruso was quiet for a moment. He did not rush the answer. He looked at the table, then at her. "I've accepted what I've built," he said. "But I've never accepted being alone in it." He held her gaze. "Until you, I didn't think there was a version of my life where someone like you existed in it." Angela felt that land in the center of her chest and stay there. "That's a terrifying thing to say," she said softly. "I know," Caruso said. "But you asked for the truth." She had. She always did. And the truth, she was finding, had a weight to it that was somehow easier to carry than all the careful, polished lies she had been handed by people who claimed to love her. She reached across the table. Her hand rested next to his. Not on top of it. Just beside it. An offering, not a surrender. He looked down at her hand. Then, carefully, like he was handling something he understood was rare, he covered it with his. They stayed like that through the rest of dinner. Saying very little. Needing to say nothing. Outside, the Connecticut night was cold and quiet. But inside, something had been decided. Something that had started on a sidewalk in January was finished being decided now. And neither of them pretended otherwise. 6 months later, Angela stood inside the ballroom on a Thursday evening and watched it become exactly what it was supposed to be. The plasterwork glowed under warm light. The iron columns had been cleaned and sealed, their original detail restored. The mezzanine curved above the main floor in a sweep of dark iron and warm wood, exactly as she had drawn it. The reclaimed bar along the east wall smelled faintly of old Brooklyn, of history that had been saved instead of demolished. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever built. And she had built it completely, entirely, on her own terms. Caruso stood beside her in the empty room. The crew had gone home an hour ago. It was just the two of them and the building and the quiet satisfaction of something finished well. "It's exactly what I saw," he said. "The first time I walked in here." "I know," Angela said. And she did. She had understood what he saw from the beginning. That was the thing about being seen by the right person. You stopped second-guessing your own vision. You stopped apologizing for how clearly you could see. She had submitted her resignation at Harmon and Blake 4 weeks ago. Not in anger, not in desperation, but in the clean, certain way you leave something when you've simply grown past it. She had opened her own firm. Reyes Architecture, a name that was both her father's and her own, registered in New York, operating out of a studio in Manhattan she had designed herself. The ballroom was her first independent commission. It was going to be on the cover of 2 architecture publications by spring. She knew it the way she knew everything about spaces. It simply was. "I need to tell you something," Caruso said. Angela turned to look at him. In 6 months she had learned the specific vocabulary of his silences. This one was the kind that carried weight. "My world is changing," he said. "The operations I've managed for 15 years. I've been in conversations with federal authorities." She went very still. "What kind of conversations?" "The kind that end things quietly," he said. "I'm not going to pretend it's simple. It's not. There are people who won't be happy. There will be a period where things are uncertain." He looked at her directly. "I'm telling you because you deserve to make your choices with full information." Angela thought about the night he had told her about the danger and said, "I can only promise I'll do everything in my power to protect you." She thought about every moment since where he had kept his word, every moment where he had been exactly what he said he was. "Are you asking me if I'm staying?" she said. "I'm telling you the truth so you can decide," he said. "There's a difference." Angela looked around the ballroom. The one that had been broken and was now whole. The one that had spent years under boards and grime, waiting for someone who could see past what it looked like to what it needed to be. She looked at Caruso. This man who was complicated and honest and careful with her in ways no one had ever bothered to be. This man who had seen her on a sidewalk watching her life get handed to someone else and had decided she was worth crossing the street for. She thought about Sienna, who had called twice in the past 6 months. Once to say the boutique was closing. Once to say Daniel had left. Angela had not answered either call. Not from cruelty. From the clean, quiet understanding that some relationships were only ever built on one person giving and one person taking, and the moment you stopped giving, there was nothing left to hold them together. She thought about her mother, who had sent a text 3 months ago saying simply, "I think I made mistakes." Angela had responded with, "I know." They had started having coffee on the first Sunday of each month. It was careful and imperfect and honest, which was more than Angela had ever expected. She turned back to Caruso. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He exhaled. Not dramatically. Just a slow, quiet release of something he had been holding. "Angela," he said. Just her name. But the way he said it, careful and certain and full of something neither of them had said out loud yet, was enough. She crossed the ballroom floor toward him, heels clicking on the restored wood. He met her halfway. He always met her halfway. That had been true from the beginning. He took her face in his hands. She looked up at him in the amber light of the room she had rebuilt from nothing. "You built something extraordinary," he said. "The building or the life?" she asked. The corner of his mouth moved. The almost smile she had learned to wait for. "Both," he said. And then he kissed her. Not desperately. Not dramatically. But with the full, unhurried certainty of a man who had already decided and was done being patient. She kissed him back the same way. Like she had always known this was where the blueprint was leading. Outside, Manhattan hummed and glittered and kept moving the way it always did. But inside the ballroom at 14 months of work and one unforgettable winter on a Connecticut sidewalk, Angela Reyes stood in the most beautiful room she had ever built, in the arms of the most complicated man she had ever known, and felt something she had spent 31 years waiting to feel. Not saved. Not rescued. Not carried. Chosen. Fully. Finally. Completely. If you stayed through this entire story, drop a comment and tell me, what is the one thing you are finally choosing for yourself today? Because Angela didn't get a perfect ending. She got a true one. A career built with her own hands. A family she chose instead of one that chose her first. Boundaries that people finally respected. And a man who saw her when she was still standing on the sidewalk, holding cold coffee, watching someone else live her life, and decided she was worth everything that came next. Share this with someone who needs to remember that being overlooked is not the same as being unworthy. And stay close, because episode 2 is coming. And you are not ready for what happens next.